The sound of my key turning in the lock was like a dinner bell for disrespect. Every single time I walked through the front door of what was supposed to be our home, the ritual began. First came the exaggerated throat clearing from 16-year-old Jake, followed by the unmistakable sound of spit hitting the hardwood floor. Then his sister Madison, 14 and equally charming, would follow suit, her saliva landing dangerously close to my shoes as she made a show of walking past me without acknowledgement. "Clean that up," I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady and authoritative. "That's what you're here for, isn't it?" Jake would respond with a smirk, already heading upstairs to his room. "You're not our mom. You're just here." Madison would giggle and chime in, "Yeah, Cinderella. The vacuum's in the closet." This had been my reality for the past 8 months since I married David. When he was home, his children were angels, polite, helpful, even occasionally sweet. But the moment his car pulled out of the driveway for work, I transformed from stepmom into live-in maid in their eyes. The spitting was just the opening ceremony of daily humiliation. "Sarah, can you make me a sandwich?" Madison would demand from her perch on the couch, not even looking up from her phone. Not please, not would you mind, just a command barked at the woman who had foolishly thought she was joining a family. "I'm not hungry right now, but I guess you could make something for yourself," I'd suggest, hoping to encourage some independence. "Ugh, that's literally why you're here. Dad married you to take care of us." She'd roll her eyes dramatically. "Mom never made us do anything ourselves." Ah yes, the sainted ex-wife Rebecca. According to Jake and Madison, she had been a domestic goddess who anticipated their every need, cooked gourmet meals daily, and never once asked them to lift a finger. The fact that David had divorced her because, in his words, she turned our kids into entitled monsters who can't function without being waited on hand and foot, seemed to be lost on them. Every morning, I'd wake up to find their breakfast dishes scattered across the kitchen counter, never in the dishwasher, always with dried food crusted on them. Cereal bowls with the remnants of milk forming a film, plates smeared with peanut butter and jelly, glasses with sticky fingerprints coating the sides. It was as if they went out of their way to use every dish in the kitchen for the simplest meals. "Sarah!" Jake would yell from upstairs. "I need my soccer uniform washed. Practice is in 2 hours." The uniform, of course, would be crumpled in a ball at the bottom of his closet, reeking of teenage boy and grass stains. When I'd suggest that maybe he should have mentioned this the night before, or better yet, learned to use the washing machine himself, I'd get the same response every time. "Come on, it takes you like 5 minutes. You don't have a real job anyway." I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which in their teenage minds meant I sat around all day doing nothing. The fact that I was often on client calls, working on tight deadlines, or managing multiple projects simultaneously was irrelevant. I was home, therefore I was available to serve. Madison was no better. She'd try on 6 different outfits each morning, leaving the rejected clothes in a heap on her bedroom floor. Then she'd appear in the kitchen, survey the breakfast options with the discerning eye of a food critic, and declare, "There's nothing good to eat. Can you go to the store?" When I'd point out that there were plenty of breakfast options available, cereal, bread for toast, eggs, fruit, she'd wrinkle her nose in disgust. "That's all boring. Mom used to make us pancakes and bacon every morning, with fresh strawberries." The mythical Rebecca grew more perfect with each retelling. She apparently had the energy to cook elaborate breakfasts, keep an immaculate house, chauffeur the kids to every activity, and somehow maintain the physique of a supermodel. It was exhausting competing with a ghost, especially one that seemed to grow more accomplished with each passing day. But it wasn't just the demands that wore me down. It was the complete lack of recognition for anything I did. I could spend 3 hours cleaning the house, doing their laundry, grocery shopping, and preparing dinner, and when David came home, he'd ask how everyone's day was. The kids would launch into detailed accounts of their school activities, their friends' drama, their homework struggles, but never once mentioned that I'd done anything for them. In their narrative, the house cleaned itself, food magically appeared, and their clothes somehow made it from dirty heap to folded and organized without any human intervention. I had become invisible labor, noticed only when something wasn't done to their standards. "Sarah, you didn't get the good mac and cheese," Madison would complain, holding up a box of the generic brand. "We only eat the Kraft kind," the blue box. Never mind that the generic version cost half the price and tasted virtually identical. Never mind that I was using my own money to supplement the grocery budget because David's child support barely covered the kids' enormous appetites and constant growth spurts. In their eyes, I was failing as a servant because I hadn't memorized their brand preferences. The worst part was how they'd deliberately create more work for me. Jake would accidentally spill things just as I'd finished mopping. Madison would decide she needed a completely different outfit after I'd already started a load of laundry, meaning another full cycle for one sweater. They'd wait until after I'd cleaned the kitchen to decide they needed a snack, pulling out every ingredient and leaving the remnants scattered across the counter. It was psychological warfare disguised as teenage thoughtlessness, and I was losing ground every day. David, bless his heart, was oblivious. When he was home, the kids transformed into model children who cleared their plates, said, "Please and thank you," and even occasionally complimented dinner. He'd beam with pride at how well we were all blending as a family, completely unaware of the Jekyll and Hyde routine his offspring performed daily. "See? I knew you'd be great with them," he'd whisper to me as we watched them actually put their dishes in the dishwasher, a miracle that occurred only in his presence. "They really respect you." I wanted to laugh or cry, or maybe both. Respect? They respected me about as much as they'd respect a self-service kiosk. I was a convenience, a resource to be exploited until I broke down or needed replacing. And the spitting, that disgusting, dehumanizing ritual, was their daily reminder that I would never be family. I would never be worthy of basic human decency. I was just the woman their father had married who happened to come with opposable thumbs and the ability to operate household appliances. But every day I told myself it would get better, that eventually they'd warm up to me, that we'd find common ground, that the fairy tale of the blended family would somehow materialize. I convinced myself that patience and persistence would win them over, that killing them with kindness would eventually melt their hearts. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in March when I made what Jake and Madison apparently considered the ultimate transgression. I asked them to clean up after themselves. It started innocuously enough. I'd spent my Monday evening cleaning the entire downstairs, vacuuming, dusting, organizing the living room that looked like a tornado had swept through it. I'd found Madison's school books under the couch cushions, Jake's soccer cleats in the kitchen, complete with mud clods, and approximately 17 empty snack wrappers wedged between couch cushions. By 10 p.m., the house looked like something from a home magazine. When I came downstairs Tuesday morning, it looked like a crime scene. Every surface was covered with the detritus of teenage existence. Homework papers scattered across the coffee table, sticky spots on the hardwood floor where someone had spilled something and just left it, and a trail of crumbs leading from the kitchen to the living room that could have guided Hansel and Gretel home. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, determined not to let my frustration show. "The house looks like it got hit by a hurricane. Could you guys please pick up your things before school?" Jake looked up from his cereal bowl, which he'd placed directly on the wooden coffee table without a coaster, naturally, and gave me a look of such pure incredulity that I almost laughed. "Are you serious right now?" he said, his voice dripping with teenage disdain. "We're eating breakfast. We don't have time for your cleaning obsession." Madison, not to be outdone, chimed in without looking up from her phone. "Yeah, we have actual important things to do. That's literally what you're here for." Something inside me snapped just a little. I'm here to be part of this family, not to be your personal cleaning service. Everyone needs to contribute to keeping our home nice. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake slowly put down his spoon and fixed me with a stare that could have frozen hell over. "Our home?" he repeated slowly. "This isn't your home. This is our dad's house that you moved into. And newsflash, we lived here just fine before you showed up with your rules and your nagging." Madison finally looked up from her phone, sensing that her brother was building up to something spectacular. "Mom never made us clean. She said kids should focus on being kids, not doing chores." "Well, I'm not your mom," I said, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left my mouth. "Exactly," Jake said, standing up and leaving his bowl and spoon on the coffee table. "You're not our mom. You're not our family. You're just some woman who married our dad. So stop trying to parent us." He grabbed his backpack and headed for the door, pausing just long enough to look back at me with a smile that was anything but friendly. "And stop trying to make us do your job." Madison followed suit, abandoning her half-eaten toast on the arm of the couch and stepping around me like I was a piece of furniture. As she reached the door, she turned back with an expression of mock concern. "Oh, and Sarah? You might want to clean up this mess before Dad gets home. Wouldn't want him to think you're not earning your keep." The front door slammed behind them, leaving me standing in the disaster zone that was supposed to be our family home. For a moment, I just stood there, taking in the full scope of their casual destruction. Then I did what I always did. I cleaned it up. But something had shifted that morning. A line had been crossed, and whether they realized it or not, Jake and Madison had just declared war. What followed was 2 weeks of escalating chaos that made their previous behavior look like minor mischief. It was as if they'd taken my request for basic cleanliness as a personal challenge and decided to show me exactly how much mess 2 teenagers could create when they put their minds to it. Jake stopped putting his dishes anywhere near the kitchen. I'd find cereal bowls in his bedroom, plates under his bed, and cups in the bathroom. When I'd bring them to the kitchen to wash them, I'd find them mysteriously back in his room the next day, as if he was deliberately creating a dirty dish relay race. Madison elevated the art of mess-making to new heights. She'd use a different towel every time she showered, leaving them in wet heaps on her bedroom floor. Her clothes covered every surface of her room like fabric confetti. She'd bring snacks to her room and leave the wrappers wherever they fell, creating a trail of evidence that led to new hiding spots I discovered daily. But the real masterpiece was the living room. Without any adult supervision after school, they turned it into their personal playground. Jake would come home and immediately claim the entire couch, spreading his homework, sports equipment, and various electronic devices across every cushion. Madison would commandeer the coffee table as her personal vanity, covering it with makeup, hair accessories, and whatever craft project she'd started and abandoned. The kitchen became a disaster zone of epic proportions. They'd make elaborate after-school snacks that required every pot, pan, and utensil in the house. Pancakes at 3 p.m. that left batter splattered on the countertops and stove. Smoothies that somehow resulted in frozen fruit decorating the ceiling. Grilled cheese sandwiches that left butter and cheese remnants welded to the pan. And then they'd just leave everything, everywhere. "Jake, you left the stove on," I'd call upstairs after discovering another abandoned cooking project. "So turn it off," would come the muffled response from behind his closed door. When I'd try to address the mess directly, they'd look at me with genuine confusion, as if I was speaking a foreign language. "Why are you telling us this?" Madison asked when I pointed out that her art supplies had taken over the dining room table. "Just move it if it bothers you. But it's your project. Don't you want to put it somewhere safe?" She shrugged with the casual indifference that only teenagers can master. "Not really. I'll probably just throw it away anyway." The bathroom situation defied description. Jake would shower and somehow manage to get water on every surface, the walls, the mirror, the floor, even the ceiling. Madison would leave her hair in the drain, her cosmetics covering the counter in a configuration that suggested a beauty supply store had exploded. I'd clean the bathroom in the morning, and by evening it would look like a hurricane had swept through it. I'd organize Madison's room, and within hours it would return to its natural state of chaos. I'd do Jake's laundry, fold it neatly, and place it on his bed, only to find it in a crumpled heap on his floor the next day. It was like being trapped in a nightmare version of Groundhog Day, where no matter how much I cleaned, organized, or tried to maintain order, the house would reset itself to maximum entropy the moment I turned my back. The worst part was their complete indifference to living in squalor. They'd navigate around piles of their own belongings like they were permanent fixtures. Jake would do his homework sitting on his bed because his desk was buried under 3 weeks' worth of discarded clothes. Madison would get ready for school each morning by digging through the clean laundry I'd placed on her dresser, somehow managing to make that pile look like it had been hit by a tornado in the process. They seemed to take genuine pleasure in watching me clean up after them. I'd catch them smirking when they saw me scrubbing the stove after their latest culinary adventure, or when I was crawling around picking up the trail of crumbs they'd left from kitchen to living room. "You missed a spot," Jake said one afternoon, pointing to a drop of pasta sauce on the cabinet door after I'd spent 20 minutes cleaning up his attempt at spaghetti carbonara. "Thanks," I said through gritted teeth. "No problem. That's what I'm here for," he replied with a grin that made my eye twitch. David remained blissfully unaware of the domestic warfare being waged in his absence. The kids had perfected their timing, ensuring that any evidence of their chaos was cleaned up by me before he arrived home. When he'd comment on how clean the house looked, they'd beam with pride as if they'd contributed to the effort. "We've been working really hard to keep things tidy," Madison would say with an innocent smile that made me want to scream. "That's my girl," David would respond, kissing her forehead while I stood in the kitchen, dishpan hands hidden behind my back, wondering if this was what a nervous breakdown felt like. But the real breaking point came during the third week of their domestic rebellion. I'd spent my entire Saturday cleaning the house from top to bottom, 6 hours of scrubbing, organizing, vacuuming, and mopping. The house looked perfect, like something from a magazine spread on Modern Family Living. David had taken the kids out for dinner and a movie, giving me the rare luxury of an entire afternoon to deep clean without anyone actively working against me. I'd even managed to organize their closets, do all their laundry, and prepare a nice Sunday brunch for the next morning. When they returned home, I was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, admiring my handiwork and feeling for the first time in weeks like I'd accomplished something meaningful. "Wow, the house looks amazing," David said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "You're incredible." Jake and Madison surveyed my work with expressions that seemed to register the clean house as a personal affront. They exchanged a look, one of those silent sibling communications that parents learn to fear, and I knew immediately that I'd made a mistake. I'd shown them exactly how much work it took to maintain their lifestyle, and in their teenage minds, that wasn't inspiration to help. It was confirmation that I could handle whatever they threw at me. What followed was a masterclass in strategic destruction that would have impressed military tacticians. Within 2 hours, they had systematically undone 6 hours of my work with the precision of a demolition crew. Every clean surface was covered with their belongings. Every organized space was chaotically rearranged. Every spotless room was returned to its natural state of teenage disaster. As I stood in the kitchen, watching Madison casually drop her jacket on the floor I'd just mopped, stepping over it like it was a natural part of the landscape, I realized that this wasn't thoughtlessness or typical teenage messiness. This was intentional. This was psychological warfare, and I was losing. The final straw came on a Thursday morning that started like any other day in what had become my personal version of hell. I woke up to find that Jake had apparently decided to make midnight pancakes and had left the kitchen looking like a crime scene. Batter dripped from the countertops to the floor in stalactite formations. The stove was coated in a layer of burnt remnants that looked like abstract art. And somehow, and I still can't figure out how, there was pancake batter on the ceiling. Madison had contributed her own special touch by leaving her wet towels in a heap on the kitchen floor after her late-night shower, creating a soggy textile obstacle course that squelched under my bare feet. The living room looked like a teenage bomb had exploded. Homework papers scattered like confetti, empty chip bags nested in the couch cushions like small mammals, and what appeared to be an entire load of clean laundry dumped in the middle of the floor. As I stood there in my pajamas, taking in the full scope of the destruction, I heard the familiar sound of Jake clearing his throat upstairs, followed by that disgusting splat of spit hitting the hardwood floor in the hallway. "Morning, Sarah," Madison called cheerfully from her bedroom. "Can you make sure my uniform is clean? I have volleyball practice after school." Her uniform, I knew without looking, would be crumpled at the bottom of her closet, unwashed since her last practice 3 days ago. Just like always. "And can you pick up more of that energy drink I like?" Jake yelled from his room. "The blue kind, not the red kind. The red kind tastes like medicine." I stood there in the wreckage of what was supposed to be our family home, listening to them bark orders at me like I was their personal assistant. And something inside me finally, irrevocably snapped. But instead of yelling, instead of having the dramatic confrontation I'd fantasized about for months, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm of someone who had just realized they held all the cards and had been playing the game all wrong. Without a word, I walked upstairs, stepping over the fresh puddle of spit that Jake had left outside his bedroom door like a calling card. I went to my room, pulled out my suitcase, and began to pack. "Sarah?" David's voice came from the bathroom where he was getting ready for work. "Everything okay? You're moving around a lot out there." I poked my head into the bathroom where my husband was blissfully shaving, completely unaware that his children had turned our home into a disaster zone overnight. "I'm going to stay at Emily's for a while," I said, referring to my sister who lived across town in a blissfully kid-free apartment. David paused, razor halfway to his face. "What? Why? Did something happen?" I looked at this man I loved, this well-meaning father who worked long hours to provide for his family and came home to a magically clean house every day, completely oblivious to the fact that his children had declared war on his wife. "I just need some space to think," I said. "About us. About this situation. About whether I can really do this." The panic that flashed across his face almost made me reconsider. Almost. But then I heard Madison's voice from downstairs. "Sarah." "Where's breakfast?" "How long?" David asked, setting down his razor with trembling hands. "I don't know," I said honestly, "until I figure some things out." I kissed his cheek, inhaling the familiar scent of his aftershave, and for a moment, I almost lost my resolve. But then Jake's voice boomed from downstairs. "Sarah, I can't find any clean socks." The moment passed. I finished packing while David got dressed in stunned silence. He kept opening his mouth to say something, then closing it again, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, as I was zipping up my suitcase, he found his voice. "What am I supposed to tell the kids?" "Tell them the truth," I said, shouldering my bag. "Tell them that their personal maid has quit." I could hear the chaos beginning downstairs as Jake and Madison realized that their breakfast wasn't magically appearing on the table. Their confused voices drifted up through the floorboards like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. "Dad!" Madison called. "Where's Sarah?" "I need my uniform washed." "Sarah!" Jake bellowed. "There's nothing to eat." David looked at me with the expression of a man who was beginning to understand just how deep the water was that I'd been drowning in. But understanding and action were two different things, and I'd learned that lesson the hard way. I walked downstairs, pulling my suitcase behind me, and entered the kitchen where Jake and Madison were standing in the wreckage of their midnight pancake adventure, looking around with the bewildered expressions of people who had suddenly realized that messes didn't clean themselves. "Where are you going?" Madison demanded, eyeing my suitcase with alarm. "Vacation," I said simply. Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. Very funny. "Seriously, what's for breakfast?" "I'm going to be late." "I have no idea," I said, pulling out my phone to call an Uber. "I don't live here anymore." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming. Both teenagers stared at me like I'd just announced I was joining the circus. "What do you mean you don't live here anymore?" Madison's voice had gone up an octave. "I mean exactly what I said. I don't live here. I don't cook here. I don't clean here. I don't do laundry here. I don't exist here." I looked around the disaster zone that was our kitchen. "This is your house. You've made that very clear. So now it's your responsibility." Jake's bravado cracked just slightly. "You can't just leave. Dad won't let you. Your dad is a grown man who can make his own decisions. Just like you two are old enough to clean up your own messes, do your own laundry, and make your own breakfast." My phone buzzed. The Uber was 3 minutes away. Madison's face had gone pale. But who's going to take care of everything?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally been extinguished. Who indeed? Who was going to clean up their endless messes? Who was going to do their laundry? Who was going to make sure there was food in the house? Who was going to maintain the comfortable lifestyle they'd taken for granted while treating the person who provided it like garbage? "I guess you'll figure it out," I said, and walked toward the front door. David appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed for work, but clearly torn about whether he should stay home. "Sarah, please. Let's talk about this." "We can work it out." "We can," I agreed. "But not while I'm being treated like hired help in my own home. When your children are ready to treat me like a human being who deserves basic respect, they know where to find me." I paused at the door and looked back at Jake and Madison, who were standing in the kitchen looking shell-shocked. For the first time since I'd known them, they were completely speechless. Oh, and one more thing, I said, my hand on the doorknob. The house doesn't clean itself. The laundry doesn't do itself. The food doesn't buy itself. And the bills don't pay themselves. Everything you've taken for granted, someone has to do it. Good luck figuring out who that someone is going to be. I walked out the front door and into the crisp morning air, feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, I could hear the chaos beginning as David tried to explain to his children why their personal servant had just walked out. Why there was no breakfast waiting. Why their world of endless convenience had just come crashing down around them. The Uber pulled up just as Jake appeared in the doorway. "You'll be back," he called after me. But his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "You can't just abandon us." I turned back one last time, looking at this 16-year-old boy who was suddenly realizing that actions had consequences. That treating people badly eventually caught up with you. That the world didn't actually revolve around him and his needs. "I'm not abandoning you," I called back. "I'm giving you exactly what you wanted. Independence. No more nagging. No more rules. No more expectations. You're free to live exactly how you want to live." I got into the car, and as we pulled away, I saw Madison join her brother in the doorway. For the first time since I'd known them, they looked young and scared and completely out of their depth. And for the first time in months, I smiled. The first call came 6 hours later. I was sitting in Emily's pristine living room, sipping coffee from a cup that I didn't have to wash myself, when my phone buzzed with David's number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally I answered. "Sarah, thank God." David's voice was strained, exhausted. "You need to come home. It's chaos here." I glanced at Emily, who was curled up in her reading chair, openly eavesdropping with undisguised glee. She'd been telling me for months that I needed to take a stand, and now she was getting front-row seats to the drama. "What kind of chaos?" I asked, though I could hear shouting in the background. "Madison can't find her volleyball uniform, Jake burned something trying to make lunch, and there's... Sarah, I don't even know how to describe what the kitchen looks like now." "Sounds rough," I said sympathetically. "What did the kids say when you asked them to clean it up?" There was a long pause. I asked Madison to clean up while I dealt with Jake's mess, and she said she doesn't know how. She literally said she's never cleaned anything before. I wasn't surprised. Madison had perfected the art of selective helplessness years before I arrived on the scene. "Well, she'll learn," I said. "YouTube has tutorials for everything. Sarah, please, just come home. We can figure this out together." "We can figure it out, David, but not with me living there being treated like the help." I meant what I said this morning. I could hear Madison crying in the background and Jake's voice raised in what sounded like panic. Part of me, the part that had spent 8 months trying to be the mother they clearly needed, wanted to cave. But the bigger part of me, the part that was tired of being spat on and treated like garbage, held firm. "I have to go," I said. "Call me when you want to have a real conversation about respect and expectations." I hung up. Emily raised her coffee mug in a toast. Here's to learning life lessons the hard way. The second call came 2 days later. This time it was Jake. "Sarah?" His voice was small, younger than I'd heard it in months. "Can you please come home? Dad's working late, and I don't know how to use the washing machine, and Madison and I haven't had a real meal in 2 days. What have you been eating?" "Cereal and, we ordered pizza yesterday, but Dad said we can't keep ordering takeout because it's too expensive. There's stuff in the fridge, but I don't know how to cook any of it." I could hear Madison in the background. "Tell her my uniform still isn't clean and I have practice tomorrow." "Jake," I said gently, "you're 16 years old. You're smart enough to figure out how to use a washing machine. The instructions are right on the front of it. But what if I break something? Or mess it up?" For the first time since I'd known him, Jake sounded genuinely scared. Not defiant, not entitled, just scared. It tugged at something in my chest. "You won't break it. And if you mess it up, you'll learn from the mistake and do better next time. That's how learning works." "But Sarah," his voice cracked slightly, "the house is really messy. Like really, really messy. I don't even know where to start." I closed my eyes, picturing the disaster zone I'd left behind, now 2 days worse with no one maintaining even basic cleanliness. "Start with one room at a time," I said. "Pick up everything that doesn't belong there. Put dirty clothes in the hamper. Put trash in the trash can. It's not rocket science, Jake. Can't you just come home, please? I promise we'll be better. The desperation in his voice was real, but I'd heard promises from him before. When you can show me that you and Madison can treat me with basic human respect, we'll talk. But how are we supposed to show you if you're not here? It was a fair question, and for a moment I wavered. But then I remembered the spitting, the demands, the casual cruelty, and I steeled myself. Figure it out, Jake. You're smart enough. The third call came from Madison, 5 days after I'd left. Sarah, I need help. She was crying, the kind of ugly sobbing that teenagers reserve for their most dramatic moments. My room is so gross I can't even sleep in it. There's something growing in one of the plates under my bed, and it smells really bad. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. Madison was only 14, and I remembered being 14 and feeling overwhelmed by life's basic requirements. Maddie, just throw the plate away. You don't have to save every dish. But it's one of the good plates. Dad will be mad! The plate is ruined, sweetheart. Sometimes when we don't take care of our things, we lose them. That's a natural consequence. But I don't know how to clean my room. It's too messy. I don't even know where to start. I could hear the genuine distress in her voice, but I also remembered 8 months of watching her create mess after mess while I cleaned up behind her like an invisible servant. Start by picking up all the clothes. Dirty clothes go in the hamper, clean clothes get folded and put away. Then pick up all the trash and throw it away. Then make your bed, one step at a time. That'll take forever. Yes, it will. That's why most people clean up as they go instead of letting everything pile up. She was quiet for a moment, processing this revolutionary concept. Will you come home if I clean my room? Madison, I'm not a reward you earn for doing basic life skills. I'm a person who deserves to be treated with respect. When you understand the difference, we can talk. By the end of the first week, David was calling twice a day. The reports from the home front painted a picture of domestic collapse that would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. Jake had attempted to do laundry and somehow turned all his white socks pink. Madison had tried to make scrambled eggs and set off the smoke alarm. Neither of them could figure out how to load the dishwasher properly, so dirty dishes were piling up in the sink. The living room looked like a hurricane had swept through it, and David was coming home from work to find his children sitting in the chaos, overwhelmed and arguing about whose responsibility it was to fix everything. I don't understand, he said during one particularly desperate call. How did you make it look so easy? Because I was doing it all, David, every day, multiple times a day. I wasn't making it look easy. I was making it possible. But they're just kids. Jake is 16. In 2 years, he'll be legally an adult. If he can't figure out how to wash dishes or do laundry by now, when exactly did you plan on teaching him? David was quiet for a long moment. I guess I thought they'd learn eventually, when they needed to. They need to now. The real breakthrough came during week 2, when Emily convinced me to drive by the house to pick up some clothes I'd forgotten. I wasn't planning to go in, just a quick stop to grab my things and leave. But when I pulled into the driveway, I could see through the living room window, and what I saw stopped me cold. Jake was on his hands and knees, scrubbing something off the coffee table with what looked like one of his t-shirts. Madison was holding a trash bag, collecting the debris that covered every surface. They were both red-faced and sweaty, moving with the kind of frantic energy that comes from pure desperation. David's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant they were doing this on their own, not because he'd demanded it, but because they'd finally hit rock bottom. As I watched, Madison said something to Jake, and instead of his usual dismissive response, he actually listened. Then he said something back, and she nodded. They were working together, actually cooperating, united by their shared predicament. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching my stepchildren slowly begin to understand what it meant to be responsible for their own environment. It wasn't pretty. Madison was clearly near tears, and Jake kept stopping to stare at the enormity of the task ahead of them. But they were doing it. When Jake finally noticed my car in the driveway, he straightened up and looked directly at me through the window. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, slowly, he raised his hand in a small wave. Not a demand, not a summons, just acknowledgement. I waved back and drove away. That evening, my phone rang again. But this time, It wasn't a desperate plea or a list of complaints. It was Jake, and his voice was different. Quieter, more thoughtful. "Sarah, I just wanted to say, I think I'm starting to understand some things." "Like what?" "Like how much work it is to keep a house from falling apart. And like how much you were doing that, we never noticed. And like," he paused, searching for words, "like how awful we were to you." I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. "And Madison wants to talk to you too, if that's okay." Madison's voice came on the line, shaky and small. "Sarah, I'm really sorry about the spitting. And all of it. I didn't realize how mean we were being. I guess I thought you liked taking care of us." "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" "Because you kept doing it, even when we were horrible to you. So I thought maybe that's just what you wanted to do." It was twisted teenage logic, but I could see how she'd arrived at that conclusion. "Madison, just because someone keeps doing something doesn't mean they enjoy it. Sometimes people do things because they love someone, or because they're trying to make a family work, even when it's hard." "Oh." She was quiet for a moment. That's kind of sad." "Yeah, it is." "Sarah?" Jake's voice again. "Would you maybe want to come have dinner with us? Nothing fancy, just like, we'll order pizza or something. But we cleaned the living room, and Madison's room doesn't smell anymore, and I figured out how to use the washing machine without turning everything pink." I smiled despite myself. "That sounds nice, but I'm not ready to move back home yet." "That's okay," he said quickly. "We just want to see you and say sorry in person, if that's okay with you." For the first time in 2 weeks, I heard something in his voice that I'd never heard before. Respect. "I'll think about it," I said. And for the first time since I'd left, I actually meant it. I showed up at the house 3 days later with a bottle of wine for David and a cautious heart. Emily had insisted on driving me, parking across the street like a getaway driver in case I needed a quick escape. "Text me if you need extraction," she said, only half joking. The front door opened before I could knock, and Jake stood there looking different. His hair was combed, his shirt was clean, and most remarkably, he was smiling. Not the smirk I'd grown accustomed to, but an actual, genuine smile. "Hi," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Thanks for coming." The house was clean. Not perfect. There were still some water spots on the coffee table that suggested amateur cleaning efforts, and I could see vacuum lines in the carpet that went in 3 different directions, but it was clean. More importantly, it felt different. The oppressive weight of resentment and disrespect that had hung over every room was gone. Madison appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron that was too big for her and had flower handprints on it. "Sarah." She moved toward me hesitantly, like she wanted to hug me, but wasn't sure if she was allowed. "I'm making cookies. Well, trying to. They're kind of burnt, but they taste okay." David emerged from the kitchen behind her, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. He walked over and kissed my cheek, a question in his eyes. "How are you holding up?" I asked him. He laughed, running a hand through his hair. "I have a whole new appreciation for what you were dealing with, and a whole new understanding of why you left." We sat down in the living room, on a couch that was actually clear of debris. And for the first time since I joined this family, we had a real conversation. "Sarah," Jake began, his voice more mature than I'd ever heard it, "we wanted to apologize. Like really apologize. Not just because we want you to come home, but because we understand now how horrible we were to you." Madison nodded vigorously. "When you left and we had to do everything ourselves, we realized how much you were doing. And how mean we were about it. The spitting thing." She shuddered with genuine shame. "I can't believe we did that." "That's so disgusting and awful. What made you realize?" I asked, genuinely curious. Jake and Madison exchanged a look. But this time, it wasn't the conspiratorial glance of co-conspirators planning mischief. It was the shared understanding of people who had been through something difficult together. "The dishes," Madison said simply. "On the 3rd day, when we ran out of clean dishes, and I realized that every single meal, every single day, someone had to wash them. And it was always you. And we just left them everywhere for you to find and clean up. And the laundry," Jake added. "I had to wear the same shirt 3 days in a row because I couldn't figure out how to work the washing machine. And then when I finally did, I realized how much time it takes. Washing, drying, folding, putting away. And you were doing it for all of us, all the time. David leaned forward. They called me at work on day 4, crying because they couldn't find anything to eat. Not because there was no food, but because they'd never learned to prepare anything that didn't come from a box or a delivery bag. I tried to make scrambled eggs. Madison said, her cheeks pink with embarrassment. I thought it would be easy because you make it look easy. I burned them so bad that the pan is probably ruined and the smoke alarm went off. And I just sat on the kitchen floor and cried because I realized I'm 14 years old and I can't even cook eggs. The image of Madison sitting on the kitchen floor, overwhelmed by the basic task of feeding herself, tugged at my heart. But I also felt vindicated. This was exactly what I'd been trying to teach them. But here's the thing, Jake continued. We didn't just realize how much work you were doing. We realized how we were treating you while you were doing it. Like you weren't even human. Like you were just there to serve us. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, and I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. The spitting was the worst part, Madison whispered. When I thought about it later, about how that must have made you feel, I wanted to throw up. I can't believe I did that to someone who was taking care of me. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their words settle. Then David cleared his throat. We want to do things differently, he said. We've been talking, all 3 of us, about how to make this work. How to be a real family instead of whatever we were before. We made a list, Jake said, pulling out a piece of paper that looked like it had been through several revisions. Of chores and responsibilities. Everyone has jobs, including Dad, and we want to post it on the refrigerator so everyone knows what they're supposed to do. Madison bounced slightly in her seat. And we want to have family meetings, like once a week, where we talk about how things are going, and if anyone has problems or complaints, we discuss them instead of just being mean or passive-aggressive. I looked at David. And you're okay with this? With actually holding them accountable? He nodded, looking slightly sheepish. I realized I was part of the problem. I was so focused on not being the mean dad that I let them treat you terribly. I was avoiding conflict and you paid the price for it. We all did, Jake said quietly. The house was horrible to live in when no one was taking care of it. And Madison and I were fighting all the time because we were both stressed and overwhelmed. And Dad was working late because he didn't want to come home to the chaos. It wasn't a family, Madison added. It was just people living in the same house and making each other miserable. The cookies Madison had been baking chose that moment to announce their completion with a loud beeping from the kitchen. She jumped up to get them, and Jake followed to help her. And I found myself alone with David for the first time since I'd left. Are you considering coming home? He asked quietly. I'm considering it, I said honestly. But David, if I come back, things have to really change. Not just for a few weeks until everyone gets comfortable and slips back into old patterns, permanently. I know. And I want that too. Not just because I miss you, though I do desperately, but because I finally understand what kind of family I want us to be. What kind of family we should have been all along. Jake and Madison returned with a plate of cookies that were indeed slightly burnt around the edges, but smelled like love and effort. Madison sat down next to me on the couch, closer than she'd ever sat before. Sarah, can I ask you something? Of course. When we were being awful to you, why didn't you give up sooner? I mean, if someone treated me the way we treated you, I would have left after like a week. It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. Because I loved your father, and I wanted us to be a family. I kept thinking that if I just tried harder, if I was just more patient, if I just gave you more time, eventually you'd accept me. But we weren't earning your patience, Jake said. We were taking advantage of it. Yeah, you were. But I also wasn't setting boundaries or standing up for myself. I was enabling you by continuing to do everything for you while you treated me badly. Madison looked thoughtful. So when you left, you were teaching us a lesson? I was saving myself, I said honestly. But yes, I was also hoping you'd learn something from it. We did, she said firmly. We learned that we don't want to live without you. And not just because you make our lives easier, but because you care about us. Even when we're awful, you still care about us. The evening continued with more conversation than we'd had in the previous 8 months combined. We talked about expectations and boundaries, about respect and responsibility, about what it means to be a family versus just people who happen to live in the same house. By the time I was ready to leave, we'd established some ground rules. Everyone would have assigned chores that rotated weekly. No one was exempt, including David. Family dinners would happen at least 4 times a week, with everyone contributing to preparation and cleanup. Disrespectful behavior, including but not limited to spitting, name-calling, or treating anyone like servants, would have immediate consequences. Weekly family meetings would address any issues before they became major problems. Everyone's contributions to the household would be acknowledged and appreciated. As I was getting ready to leave, Madison grabbed my arm. "Sarah, are you coming home soon?" I looked around at the clean house, at Jake loading the dishwasher without being asked, at David folding laundry while we talked, at Madison herself, the girl who'd been spitting on the floor when I arrived just 2 weeks ago, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I'd married David. Hope. "I think so, sweetheart. But let's take it slow, okay? Maybe I'll come for dinner a few more times. Stay over on weekends, and we'll see how everyone does with the new rules." She nodded eagerly. "Can I show you my room before you go?" I deep cleaned it, and I organized my closet, and I even learned how to change my sheets. As I followed her upstairs, I caught Jake's eye. He was grinning as he wiped down the counter, actually grinning while doing a chore. "Hey, Sarah?" he called after me. "Yeah? Thanks for not giving up on us completely. I know we didn't deserve it, but thanks." Madison's room was indeed transformed. Not perfect. There were still some questionable decorating choices and a suspicious pile of clean clothes on her chair, but it was clean, organized, and most importantly, livable. "I can actually see my floor now," she said proudly. "And I found so many things I thought I'd lost, including that book you recommended months ago that I said I didn't want to read, but actually did want to read, but was too stubborn to admit it." She pulled the book from her newly organized shelf, and I saw that she'd bookmarked several pages. "Maybe we could talk about it sometime?" she asked hopefully. "Like a book club or something?" "I'd like that very much." As Emily drove me back to her apartment that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The road back wouldn't be easy. Changing family dynamics never is. But for the first time since I'd married David, I felt like we might actually become the family I'd always hoped for. 3 weeks later, I moved back home, not to resume my role as unpaid household manager, but to take my place as an equal member of a family that had finally learned what respect looked like. The spitting stopped completely. The demands became requests, usually accompanied by offers to help with other tasks. Jake started doing his own laundry without being asked, and Madison began cooking dinner once a week. Ambitious meals that didn't always turn out perfectly, but were always made with effort and love. More importantly, I felt seen. When I cleaned the kitchen, someone noticed and said, "Thank you." When I did grocery shopping, someone offered to help carry bags. When I was having a bad day, someone asked if there was anything they could do to help instead of adding to my burden. It wasn't perfect. No family is. There were still occasional backslides, arguments about whose turn it was to take out trash, and moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But we had tools now: regular communication, clear expectations, and most importantly, a shared understanding that everyone in the family deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. 6 months later, as I was preparing dinner while Jake set the table and Madison helped David fold laundry in the living room, I realized something profound had changed. I was no longer fighting to earn my place in this family. I belonged here, and everyone knew it. When Madison accidentally knocked over her water glass at dinner and immediately jumped up to clean it without being asked, Jake automatically handed her paper towels, and David moved his plate out of the way to help. No one looked at me expectantly to handle it. No one treated it as my responsibility because I happened to be the woman in the house. It was just a family working together to solve a small problem, the way families should. Later that evening, as I was reading in bed, Madison knocked on the door. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Always." She climbed onto the bed next to me, something the old Madison never would have done. "Are you happy you came back? Like, really happy? Not just pretending to be happy?" I set down my book, and looked at this girl who had gone from spitting on the floor when I entered a room to seeking out my company, who had transformed from an entitled teenager into someone who was learning to be thoughtful and responsible. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm really happy I came back." "Good," she said, settling in next to me. "Because even though I was a complete brat before, I always hoped you'd stay. I just didn't know how to show it without looking like I was betraying Mom's memory or something." It was the first time she'd ever mentioned her mother to me directly, and the first time she'd acknowledged the complicated emotions that came with accepting a step-parent. "You know what, Madison? You can love your mom's memory and still make room for new people in your life. It doesn't have to be either or." She nodded, wiping away tears I pretended not to see. "I think Mom would have liked you. She always said family wasn't just about blood. It was about people who choose to take care of each other." As she headed back to her room, she paused in the doorway. "Hey, Sarah, thanks for teaching us how to be a real family, even if we were too stupid to appreciate it at the time." After she left, I sat in the quiet house listening to the sounds of my family getting ready for bed. David brushing his teeth in the bathroom, Jake's music playing softly from his room, Madison talking on the phone with a friend about weekend plans. Normal family sounds. The sounds of people who had learned to share space with respect and affection instead of resentment and entitlement. It had taken a temporary separation, some hard truths, and a lot of growing up on everyone's part, but we'd finally become what I'd hoped for from the beginning. Not a perfect family, but a real one. And no one had spit on the floor in 6 months. Sometimes the best lessons are learned the hard way, but they're the ones that stick the longest.